Welcome aboard, folks. Here we go again, the Phil Tourney podcast. Today, we're going to go over a lot of different topics that are very, very interesting, and they all have a connection. I'm going to say a few. Well, okay, how about JFK? Of course, the USS Liberty, 911, the Gaza war. But first, Carl, I want you to get and go back to June of this year at our reunion. And, we got hassled and all the stuff, what went on. Did you see any disobedience or disrespect or hate from the crew of the USS Liberty or their guests?
I did not. You have very long suffering and faithful crew members and guests. I thought everyone was quite appropriate. I didn't see any issues.
Good. And, we were getting bad press from the TV station, their local TV station. Did you know that?
I wasn't really aware of it. I just know that all Liberty events tend to draw opposition because, powerful forces would prefer that day in 1967 not be remembered. They do not want the crew honored, which the crew must be honored.
Well, we want to get more than honored. We just want to honor our shipmates that were killed that day. Young men. I was 20 years old back then, and most of the guys that got killed were in that age, and they never got a chance. So that's for another day. But it's sad, and all we're trying to do is get together, have brotherhood. We probably never see each other again. They're dying off. We're all dying off. But that's all we're here for, is to tell the truth and get together. So I want everybody to know that. But Carl, we talked about, JFK, Liberty, 911, and of course the Gaza war. Go ahead and start off what you'd like to talk about, please.
Well, my name is Karl Golovin, retired special agent, U.S. Customs Service. Spent most of my career in South Florida investigating arms export, embargo violations, drug trafficking, etc., but reassigned to the D.C. area just before 9/11 to work in internal affairs. And after 9/11 happened, I volunteered to be sent to New York to help with the cleanup and such. And, being in internal affairs, we maybe got a unique assignment. I was up there in November that year for 3 weeks, and with colleagues, or many of us, a group of 30 about, arrived. I think it may have been that many simultaneously. We were briefed. We were told every other day we would be working at Fresh Kills landfill, where the finer rubble of World Trade Center 7 was going to be brought. Now, that was the third tower that came down that day. A lot of people aren't familiar with that. 47 stories, about 400 feet from the Twin Towers. It housed probably the largest domestic CIA office outside of Virginia, as well as Secret Service, some DOD entities, Security Exchange Commission's office, investigative office for Wall Street. And the Enron records were stored in their building. All that lost when Building 7 collapsed at 5:20 in the afternoon in 7 seconds. I wasn't aware of that when I was up there as a volunteer, but we were tasked with sifting the finer rubble of that building after it was brought to the landfill for anything that might be a computer component. And we were told Secret Service, CIA didn't want their computer components left in the landfill, which made perfect sense until about 5 years later when I was awakened to where the building was, how tall it was, how quickly it collapsed into its own footprint. And you realize right away that was a controlled demolition, but yet there were fires in the building earlier in the day, and it came down so conspicuously 5:20 in the afternoon. It leaves you wondering whether, along with computer components, whether I might have really been retrieving undestroyed demolition electronics that other interests were concerned might still be there, might be found years from now. So I've digressed a little bit from the broader history. So that leaves me, we had initiated this call, and then we had to restart because of technical issues. So I want to go back to a man I spoke of, Dr. Alan Zabrowski, who at one time was director of the Army War College director of studies at the Army War College. And his analysis immediately after 9/11 is as good today as it was 24 years ago, which is when you realize number 7 is a controlled demolition, and you look at the videos and you realize there were pre-positioned explosives in not just 7, but also towers 1 and 2. And we're told Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, hijacked planes, that caused all this to happen. just does not make any sense. So Dr. Zabrowski says when you realize that there were pre-positioned explosives in those three towers, he says there are only a few entities in the world that could pull this off, who had the logistical and the technical capability to install the explosives and then choreograph the timing of their going off to bring down the towers, the three towers, into their own footprints. So Dr. Zabrowski says primarily Mossad. They're the ones who historically have their fingerprints on the false flag terrorism. But Mossad, their military colleagues, Israeli as well. I would add a caveat. I believe there had to be cooperation, at least at some level, in the U.S. intelligence and military. Some would say the British should be given some credit. After all, a BBC broadcaster seemed to have inside knowledge about when Number 7 was going to collapse. She was announcing on BBC that Number 7 had collapsed when it was still visibly standing in the background behind her. But so all this false flag terrorism, what's the purpose? It's when allied interests get together and they attack somewhere in a way that it can be blamed on a preferred enemy. And the whole purpose is to outrage the population so that we all get behind whatever war or attacks are planned. Now, in your instance, with the USS Liberty, 1967, you were overflown by unmarked aircraft, and then you were conspicuously attacked by Israel. Rockets, napalm, then torpedo boats hitting your ship. And as I understand it, you've learned in years since then that this was truly a false flag event. That at the highest levels, U.S. authorities were working with Israel, and the idea was to sink the Liberty, lose all hands, blame it on Israel, and that within minutes there were U.S. aircraft in the air with nuclear weapons within minutes of Cairo. And this would have greatly accelerated the plan for a, quote, greater Israel if Egypt were essentially taken out. It would have been calling the Soviet Union's bluff on whether we're going to go all nuclear into World War III or not. But at that time, there were Pentagon interests that they even asked JFK to preemptively nuke the Soviet Union. So I imagine they were okay with taking the risk to advance Israel's interests. And we see the same thing at play on 9/11, because right after 9/11, what do? We go into the Middle East. And ever since, we have been destabilizing, breaking up regimes in proximity to Israel that could theoretically otherwise could oppose Israel, such as Iran, which is still, I think, on the agenda of some to destroy Iran for the benefit of the Greater Israel Project. And there are British interests that have long had an interest in controlling the oil in that region, controlling the Suez Canal, arguably U.S. interests as well. But the key players probably in both of these events, I should take a break and give you a chance to intervene with some questions, but I'd like to then go back to JFK. I'd like to even go back to World War I and a very credible witness that points towards Zionism, the Greater Israel Project, even as it was mapped out in the late 1890s. All of that has been at work for over the last 130 years in bringing us to where we are today, which is a matter of concern, I think, to all of us.
It is a great concern. Right now, Gaza it's not a ceasefire. Israelis are fighting them right now, or, they're attacking them. And I don't think it was ever meant to be a ceasefire, to be honest with you. I think this is just all a ruse. They got the living hostages back, and I think they're going to take more land. 7, Carl. That was nothing but a land grab. If our ship sinks, the war going on right now wouldn't have happened, because they would have gotten it all right then. Everything they ever wanted, they'd have got it right then.
Yes, sir.
In 67.
If your crew had not miraculously gotten that SOS out and blown the whole false flag up, and the Liberty had been lost, and we had blamed it on Egypt, as apparently was the plan, they probably would have gone ahead and, that would have been the justification for U.S. Attack on Egypt to accelerate the Israeli land grab. Yes.
Absolutely. When you were, doing your job, getting all this stuff out of the pit and stuff, and you didn't know then what you could have been doing, you didn't know it was, something connected to somebody else.
I knew there was something special about Number 7, because we were briefed that, CIA, Secret Service, other interests were in the building. And I knew it wasn't being publicized very much, but I didn't know the size of the building. I didn't know what brought it down. I hadn't heard it being hit by an airplane, but no, it was really about 2006. A professor in Utah I think Young University, Dr. Stephen Jones began to publish studies about what was found in the dust of, there was dust pervading all of Manhattan. There's evidence in that of very high temperature fires that couldn't be explained by jet fuel and aircraft. The only thing that could explain it really was the use of militarized thermitic demolition substances, which would, cut through steel. As Richard Gage, an architect who speaks often on these topics, he always says, like a hot knife through butter. Well, thermitic explosives shaped charges can be used for, evidently, the military, I think, even uses them underwater. It tends to generate its own oxygen. So it continued, which is, well, the fires continued to burn in the depths underneath the Twin Towers long after the day of 9/11. And one might suspect that's due to the type of demolition materials used. So I wanted to jump to early June, I had heard that Senator Johnson was interested in exploring what happened in number 7 and having hearings. Excuse me. So June 2nd, I went down to his office at the Hart Senate office building, and I went to his immediate office and also to his committee office, the investigations committee, subcommittee. And I distributed about 4 or 5 business cards I carry everywhere that to specific staff members. And I wrote WTC 7 on the top. I explained, hey, I helped sift the rubble of that building. I want to talk to Senator Johnson. I'm a witness for you. Then, I left the building. As I'm leaving the building, fortuitously, Senator Johnson, I recognize him. He's walking in. I say, Senator Johnson. He comes over and we chat for several minutes there at the exit. And the first thing I told him, and he's recounted our meeting on a few occasions, and he has said that, I was tasked with finding anything that could be an electronic component. I actually sort of expanded my initial mandate, anything that might be a computer component. I wanted to err on the side of caution. So, hey, if it's electronic, it might have been part of a computer. So, I retrieved probably, I know a lot of computer, like the old magnetic tape. I took that off the conveyor belts. There were sifting machines set up at Fresh Kills landfill, and the rubble would just go by you for hour after hour during an 8-hour shift. And we ran those shifts 24 hours a day, 3 shifts. And whatever we found, we put into a white 5-gallon Home Depot style bucket. Those buckets someone took them away periodically. We were told we were working also with FBI up there. But at the end of the shift, we'd also leave buckets by a little portable building where we were based out of. Now, my suggestion to Senator Johnson, well, the first thing I said to him was, Senator Johnson, the reason probably so few people have come to you is when I was eligible to leave the government in 2007, a great blessing with civil service benefits, I wanted to do something new. I intended to volunteer with Ron Paul's presidential campaign. He had somewhat he did awaken me to issues about the monetary system, the Federal Reserve, and I thought, he's one that might make a difference. So I was willing to leave with my benefits, not for another paying job, but just to try to help him get elected. Sorry, it's emotional to think about those years. So I told Senator Johnson when I went to put in my retirement separation paperwork at age 50 in 2007. We won't process your paperwork. You can't retire unless you sign this document. And it was a non-disclosure agreement. Now, it struck me as odd because, if they wanted me to never disclose anything, they should have given me the NDA document at the beginning of my 26-year federal career, not as I'm leaving the door. So, I pondered what to do, and I'm not sure what inspired me, maybe some things I've studied online. Above the signature line, I printed under protest, and then I signed my name because they said they wouldn't process my paperwork. I could stay in my job series till 57. I could stay even till, I know people have stayed into their 70s and, they're moved into managerial non-enforcement positions. But no, I was ready to do something new. So I wrote under protest, and I explained this to Senator Johnson, that if he wants a lot of people to come forward, Congress needs to either pass a resolution or enact some kind of legislation freeing anybody associated with 9/11 from any perceived non-disclosure requirement. Because there are a lot, of people I'm in a way fortunate without family, cousins, relatives at age 68 now, but I can take the risk. I've got savings, but My understanding is a civil service pension is about the safest thing you can have, absent treason, which it's actually treason that I want to call out. To not talk about what I consider to be likely to have happened on 9/11 and other events like Kennedy's assassination. It's essential that we get to the bottom of all this. So I told that to Sarah Johnson. He's recounted our conversation, but never never announced, hey, if you have a non-disclosure agreement, you're afraid to come forward, we'll protect you. Don't worry about that. Because I think others would. I mean, colleagues of mine who I have spoken with who were there sifting rubble, they don't want to talk with me about it because they have families, et cetera. They're concerned. Senator Johnson has expressed concern. He, of course, over the years accepted about $500,000 from AIPAC. You know, if anyone touches on the potential Israeli Mossad aspect to 9/11, he's expressed, not explaining this specifically, that, you know, Charlie Kirk, hey, he'd started to step maybe away from completely supporting all of what Israel does in Gaza, et cetera. So I want to encourage Senator Johnson. I'm a bit of a skeptic because in some of his podcast interviews since then, he said, "Yeah, but this guy he didn't leave any contact information. If he's listening, I hope he'll recontact me," as if he were trying to distance himself, as if I were going to vanish into the background, forgotten what I had sent to him. Well, when I wasn't recontacted soon after visiting his office, I waited a few weeks because they said I'd be contacted for an interview. I had an email address for a legislative assistant, I believe, and I sort of put some pressure through an email to him to be introduced to someone on the investigations committee. Managed to have myself scheduled to be interviewed by telephone on July 14th, 2 in the afternoon, 1 in the afternoon, I believe it was. Well, I explained having sifted the rubble, and I thought, I suggest they need to pursue with, my legacy agency, U.S. Customs, is now part of DHS, but the Johnson's committee has subpoena authority. They could require the agencies who organize groups like my internal affairs team that sifted the finer rubble of number 7, who requested that, and with what were the criteria they were given for our search. Was it possibly even requested before 9/11? There are some indications that maybe plans had been considered for replacing Building 7 even before the day it was demolished. So one wonders. In any event, I would suggest that I was an intelligence research specialist and analyst before I was a special agent. And my understanding from experience of how management works is that if they're having us go through the trouble of picking these little pieces of what might be a circuit board, et cetera, out of the finer rubble of number 7, in the bucket, somebody takes the buckets away. Somebody is analyzing what we turned in. They're going to photograph it. They're going to catalog it. They're going to generate a report, providing a degree of confidence to management, either that we got all the computer components or we got what might have been demolition electronics. Who knows what they actually decided after they examined what we retrieved. But so I provided Senator Johnson's investigative staff with my travel documents associated with the temporary detail, work schedules showing myself and other colleagues which shifts we worked at Fresh Kills. Every other day we were at Ground Zero babysitting the remains of, World Trade Center number 6, the Customs House, which, there was a vault beneath that housed seized property, other evidence of customs investigations. So we were just helping create a chain of custody on that building. But Senator Johnson, in these more recent interviews, he's never announced, if you're worried that when you left the government, they asked you to sign a non-disclosure agreement, maybe because you were a 9/11 responder, forget about that. The Congress will take care of you. We want to know what really happened. I'm waiting for him to do that. But I want to encourage Senator Johnson. I want to have confidence that even though, he might have anxieties I imagine when AIPAC gives you money that they probably bring pressure to bear if you ever begin to deviate from their script. And if we want to get to the bottom of what's happened, really World War I all the way forward through the assassination of the first Secretary of Defense, James Forrestal, a few years, 15 years or so before Kennedy's assassination. To jump briefly to Kennedy's assassination, there was an official narrative put out almost the same day, just like with 9/11. Oh, it was the lone nut, Lee Harvey Oswald. The backup to that is, well, oh gosh, maybe it was CIA, maybe it was the words then for the deep state were the military-industrial complex. Maybe it was, maybe it was the Soviet Union or Cuba turning the CIA operation against him around to get Kennedy. All these things that will just terrorize the American people to not think, well, we can't hope to know the truth. We should just be happy with some narrative that will placate us. And we sure don't want this to escalate into World War III because it was the Soviets. But in reality, few people remember that Lyndon Johnson was raised as an ardent Zionist. I know when you were interviewed by Candace Owens, she mentioned a man named Stanislav Gomulak, a PhD candidate, wrote his PhD dissertation on the foreign affairs background of Lyndon Johnson. And Johnson was raised in a religious sect that from that point forward, he was an ardent Zionist. And his political support as he moved through his career ultimately, Speaker of the House, was it? Or was he in the Senate at that point? He may have been at the highest levels of the Senate. In any event, Johnson was forced onto the ticket with John Kennedy. Neither Robert or John Kennedy wanted LBJ as a running mate, but seemed politically expedient. He helped bring in the vote from Texas, all of that. But at that moment, Kennedy was involved aggressively in correspondence with the prime minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, over Israel's efforts to acquire nuclear weapons. As CIA was aware of it, the number 3 guy at CIA, James Jesus Angleton, who was an ardent Zionist, arguably he was a Zionist, arguably a Mossad mole within CIA, running counterintelligence. And it's only come out in the recent JFK records that Angleton actually considered one of the important things he accomplished in his career was he actually recruited, I'm sure they were already Mossad assets, he recruited Israeli Jews who were of Russian, Soviet, Eastern European lineage because they understood Russian, had ties there, and he planted them within the U.S. government, within CIA. The fellow who opened Oswald's mail, they were surveilling Oswald right up till the assassination, was historically an Israeli, brought in by Angleton to do that kind of work at CIA. So here we have Kennedy is fighting to keep Israel from getting nuclear weapons. Angleton, actually, unbeknownst to JFK, is probably facilitating Israel getting nuclear weapons. Kennedy, there had been an Israeli Mossad false flag attack on U.S. interests in Egypt back in 1954 called the Lavon Affair, named after a Mossad agent or maybe a Mossad director, Lavon, who recruited Egyptian Jews to masquerade as Muslims and to perpetrate bombings on U.S. and British interests in Egypt to drive a wedge between us and Egyptian President Nasser and to demonize Muslims in Egypt. So then the Lavon affair was botched. One of the explosions went wrong. Something happened. The U.S. was aware, and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee held hearings about the Lavon affair, about this Mossad false flag terrorism against U.S. interests in Egypt. And out of that, they recommended to by then President John Kennedy, that he ordered the Israeli lobby, which was then, I think, called the American Zionist Committee or Council, that they register as foreign agents because they saw undue Jewish Mossad. Senator Johnson's terrified of, saying Jewish, using the word Jew. I'm going to digress here for a moment and explain. I'm not afraid to discuss, religious aspects to all of this because, in part, I'll point to a man named Benjamin Friedman, who was a prominent Jew at the time Woodrow Wilson was in office, at the time of his reelection in 1916. He gave a talk at the Willard Hotel in 1961, and he was a prominent Jew, so prominent he was part of the Jewish delegation to the Versailles Treaty talks at the end of World War I. And he explains, I'll get to this later, I hope, the history of what really caused World War I. But he says, one doesn't be afraid. The term Jew is simply a redaction of the term Judah or Judahite. And that from Friedman's perspective, he converted to Roman Catholicism late in life. He says really what's called Judaism today really should be called Talmudism because the Talmud is a prominent document of rabbinical Judaism. It's 9,000 pages of the oral teachings of great rabbis from like the time of Christ up till around 600 AD, perhaps. And there's some, derogatory things said about Christians and Gentiles in general there. But what I want to say is that all of us are from some kind of a religious background, whether Jew, Protestant, Lutheran, Roman Catholic, Orthodox Christian. I was raised in a Unitarian church, which is a whole different can of worms. I tell people as a Unitarian, we were encouraged to believe anything we wanted, just not believe it was true to the exclusion of anything else. So, you would often spend Sunday after a sermon that maybe was a little bit esoteric, you would just talk with each other about, like, well, what's really going on? What's true? What's important? In fact, in that environment, we're probably more likely to have discussed Israeli involvement in all these things than in your average Reformed or Catholic church today. So the way I approach it is, let's just forget, we don't want to offend anyone, but let's just, anyone's religious viewpoint, let's call that a narrative. Some people are brought up with the Jewish narrative, some with the Roman Catholic narrative, and that imprints us. We tend to view everything else in our lives through that lens because we're part of a community. We don't want to be excommunicated from that community. And I have empathy for people who are Jewish, whether they're even completely secularized Jews. They are subject to being tapped on the shoulder by Mossad. This is perhaps the greatest power of Mossad. I think a former Mossad agent named Viktor Ostrovsky wrote of this in a book titled By Way of Deception. I believe that's where this is from, that Jews throughout the world, and they are a cohesive network as they're mandated by their own scriptures to be cohesive and to view themselves to always stay separate from the Gentiles, the rest that they have a special calling, but they're always supposed to support their own. So if the most extreme Jewish leadership is A-OK with false flag terrorism to bring the U.S. into the Middle East to destroy Muslim neighboring countries to advance the Greater Israel Project, if you're an Israeli if you're a Jewish banker in New York, stock trader, if you're much of the leadership when I was a special agent of the U.S. Customs in retrospect, was Jewish. And I've pondered, I was assigned one or two cases that touched on Israeli issues. And, well, it was interesting how all that worked. At that time, a Jewish assistant U.S. attorney was assigned to be the one I worked with on it. And it never went anywhere, but that's another story. So I think we can all say, all right, let me get back to, if one is Jewish and Mossad has a purpose for you to facilitate something important for Israel, Jews in general, globally, important that you help them accomplish. And you might be, maybe you're a banker, maybe you're an attorney, maybe you're a policeman, and they ask you, you need to either look the other way or you need to make sure this happens. Maybe they went to Larry Silverstein, who got the lease on the World Trade Center properties just a couple of months before 9/11, and he double insured them against terrorism attacks. And he says he used to speak every Sunday by phone with Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel. So, I think Larry Silverstein got a tap on the shoulder and was told, hey, something's in the works here. And, those trade center buildings, they're riddled with asbestos and, maybe key people at the Port Authority, which owned those buildings, they were in the loop and said, let's give a 99-year lease to Silverstein. And, we're going to be doing a lot of interior elevator renovation or high-speed internet renovation updates that people are going to be working in the building around the clock. So people have access that could have pre-positioned explosives, maybe even at the highest levels. Private contractors, arguably. The FBI rounded up hundreds of suspected Israeli spies after 9/11. And the head of the criminal division of the Department of Justice, Michael Chertoff, a dual national, dual Israeli U.S. citizen, whose mother was one of the founding members of Mossad, whose father was a rabbi. He shipped all those suspected Israeli spies back to Israel on visa violations. So even the, quote, dancing Israelis, the New Jersey police got a tip that some people were filming they set up to film the collapse of the towers before they even were hit by a plane. They were in a van, company, Urban Moving Systems, an Israeli front company owned that company. All New Jersey police pulled these guys over, and two of the four, at least, provably, Mossad connected. And they said, we're not your enemy. We were just here to document the event. Our enemy is the same. Our enemy is the Palestinians. Well, wait a minute. That's an agenda I haven't signed on to. Much of Congress has signed on to it through being compromised by AIPAC funding. I think they should I think they should simply renounce their APAC funding. APAC, even today, should be made a foreign agent. Why should, yeah, there are a lot of reasons why we would not want to lose Israel as a protected standalone ally in the Middle East. But John Kennedy wanted to have good relations with all the Middle East countries. He wanted Israel to allow the Arabs displaced through the Nakba, through the terrorism by Israel, by the new Israeli population, to be allowed to return to their homes. It was maybe 600,000 or 800,000 as of Kennedy's time in office. So John Kennedy would have never greenlighted the Six-Day War, 1967, during which you were targeted for attack by Israel. So it was very important that, excuse me, I'm congested, allergies, or whatever this time of year, sinus issues. But Kennedy would never have greenlighted Israel to attack Egypt. But Zionist LBJ, ardent Zionist for his life, he was already in position. He was the vice president. And he certainly, by his role in the cover-up, he obviously went along with something. Well, how much he knew in advance, I don't know. I suspect Angleton coordinated the CIA manipulation of Mossad as the patsy. The extent to which whoever pulled the trigger will never know that. But yeah, there certainly was, a man named Frank Sturgis, who was CIA. He testified in a trial in Miami, and I think it was the mid-'80s, concerning an allegation that CIA officer E. Howard Hunt had been in Dallas the day of Kennedy's assassination, something Hunt long denied. Well, this was a trial on appeal. A publication in the D.C. area called The Spotlight had published an article alleging that Hunt was going to be outed as having been in Dallas that day. Mark Lane, an interesting figure in and of himself, defended the publication Spotlight. E. Howard Hunt testified. There were depositions taken of key CIA people. A woman named Maritza Lorenz, who was a CIA asset. She had apparently once been a girlfriend of Castro himself, was interviewed, and she said she was told after the fact that Frank Sturgis said he was part of the team with E. Howard Hunt. E. Howard Hunt was the paymaster of the team. They were in Dallas, and he told her after the fact that, we killed the president that day, which Frank Sturgis once did work for Mossad. So there you have Mossad right within the team that, he even acknowledged, he claimed, took credit. He proudly claimed he was involved in it. Maybe he was just bragging. I don't know. My father actually worked in the Kennedy executive office. He was involved in the space program early on. And so I've followed the Kennedy's assassination, what's come out over the decades very closely. And I can tell you that the JFK research community is funded by and controlled at the highest levels by people who keep discussion of Israel, keep discussion of Kennedy's fighting the nuclear issue or ordering the lobby to register as foreign agents. It's pervasive. I'll show you a book, The Unspoken Truth by author Laurent Guilleneau. I've tried to distribute this at Kennedy assassination conferences, and they wouldn't let me rent a table to distribute it. They tried to shut it down because that book faithfully addresses, the Johnson connections and the Zionist bias. The connections are, put it this way. At the 60th anniversary conference concerning Kennedy's assassination at the Cyril Wecht Forensic Institute in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, part of Duquesne University, Cyril Wecht is always honored at he's just died in the last year, but has always been honored at JFK conferences, often given a speaking role. And he literally would give almost very entertaining, almost a song and dance, mocking the magic bullet theory, which he is always put to as the most staunch opponent of the magic bullet theory. Well, it came out when Arlen Specter, who was the attorney with the House Select Committee on Assassinations, Jewish attorney, maybe he was tapped on the shoulder by Mossad. He came up with a magic bullet theory to pin it all on Oswald. So here you have Cyril Wecht, Jewish ancestry, no doubt tapped on the shoulder. The term they use for the Jewish world community subject to being tapped on the shoulder by Mossad and asked to help with something is called Sayanim. It's an unusual term to me, but Laurent Guilleneau has written about it. So, we're both Arlen Specter on the House Select Committee helping create the magic bullet theory, and Cyril Wecht, forensic pathologist, arguing how absurd the magic bullet theory was. But, he's just talking always bogged down in the minutia of where did the bullet come from? How many shots were there? Where was the car stopped? Is the Zapruder film manipulated? To this day, the JFK community, quote, led by Jefferson Morley and his partner Lawrence Schnapp, who I think is Cyan, they just keep talking about rehashing the same stuff, maybe a little bit on the new records that have come out. Which, interestingly, James Ankleton's church committee testimony, I believe he spoke about his having brought Israelis of Eastern European lineage into Jewish Israeli Mossad assets into CIA. So there you go. So Cyril Wecht, forensic pathologist, he's been fighting Arlen Specter's magic bullet theory for decades. Well, Arlen Specter ran for the U.S. Senate, Pennsylvania. Cyril Wecht endorsed him to be a U.S. senator. The man who created the greatest lie in the last 60 years, the magic bullet theory, endorsed by hero of the JFK research community, Cyril Wecht, to be in the Senate, where I guess it's helpful to have people who are skilled liars. And well, I want to redeem Senator Ron Johnson from his saying that his office couldn't find any contact information from me, that they must have, maybe I didn't drop off any cards. Well, I managed to be in contact. So I was interviewed by his investigations committee July 14th, 6 weeks before he went on the James Corbett report, and almost simultaneously was interviewed by Brett Weinstein. Both of those, he said, oh, this guy, he just vanished. What were they trying to cover up also that I was interviewed by the investigations committee? For my own protection, maybe I've learned from over the decades from having been in internal affairs, I audio recorded my telephonic interview by Johnson's Permanent Select Committee on Investigations. They cut me off after about a half hour because I said during that interview, you need to, well, I've said in emails to Johnson, you need to honor the liberty, those who are lost. You need to honor the survivors by interviewing them, because you need to cut to the chase that, 9/11 was falsifying terrorism. The greatest beneficiary of it was Israel. Was it Mossad? Was it our people? Was it the Brits? I don't know, but it was falsifying terrorism, and we need to get to the bottom of who had access to put any explosives. I've just filed a FOIA request with NSA asking for any and all records of wireless spectrum used to trigger explosive demolitions in proximity to the World Trade Center buildings or the Pentagon on that one day, 9/11. Of course, I've gotten a denial letter denied. We can either confirm or deny such records exist, but NSA does capture the wireless spectrum that would have been used for those demolitions. I got the denial letter. I sent a copy to former Representative Kurt Weldon, and he promised me he was going to pass it on to Senator Johnson, and Senator Johnson would demand NSA respond. Because what's the national security interest in protecting the identity, the mere fact that wireless spectrum was used to remotely detonate explosives in towers 1, 2, and 7? That I think it's more important we know about that than it be protected. So back to what I said to that Johnson's committee. I mentioned to them Christopher Bolin, who is not adequately honored by what remains of the 9/11 Truth Committee. They want to keep again talking about the logistics, the mechanics of how the buildings came down, and was it thermite? Was it this, that? Well, what about Christopher Bolin was a journalist at the time of 9/11. Coincidentally, he studied the Middle East Hebrew, had lived in Israel for a time, and he was able to write about connections that pointed towards it being a Mossad operation, even to the point of Israeli expertise in the remote piloting of aircraft. Of course, we know today that most of even NSA, probably NSA's software for monitoring all of our communications is Israeli technology. So, they're in the loop with the Five Eye countries on all of our intercepts. But I've shared with you that recording in an email attachment of my interview by Johnson's committee. I don't know if you've had time to listen to it, but I said we need to get into this history of things happening for the benefit of the Greater Israel Project. And I'm going to jump all the way back to World War I here. I'll try to keep it brief, but I think it's crucial that audio recording of Benjamin Friedman, Fredman, talking to the a Christian group gathered in a conference room at the Willard Hotel in 1961. Well, he begins by, first of all, explaining, don't be afraid to talk about, Jewish involvement in politics. He said, even then, it's a waste of time to go to a member of Congress. They're controlled by the lobby. He said that circa 1961. He said, our hope is to get Kennedy to keep us out of a tragic Middle East war. Yeah, he's saying in 1961, Benjamin Friedman saw that we were going to get drawn into the Israeli-Arab conflict. And what he explains is, all right, going all the way back to 1916, Benjamin Friedman was a confidential liaison from Woodrow Wilson's campaign to Henry Morgenthau Jr., where the money flowed to get politicians elected. He's so prominent after World War I. Well, let me back up. Woodrow Wilson he campaigned for re-election, arguing that he kept us out of World War I. And then immediately after getting re-elected, he took us into World War I. Friedman says that all the media in America was very pro-German up till the time of Wilson's re-election. And then on the dime, it turned towards calling them the Hun and talking about cutting off the hands of babies and just demonizing Germany. So what Friedman says happened is, he says World War I was brought upon Germany by the British, the British, the French, and Russia. The Dutch aren't to blame here. Germany was just getting too strong industrially, too strong economically. They had a very strong military, and they just needed to be brought down a notch. So British, French, Russia caused the war on Germany. And very early on, Benjamin Friedman, speaking in 1961, says the Germans had the British essentially defeated. The British were almost out of food, ammunition, and Germany offered the British very favorable settlement terms. And the attorney would call it status quo ante. Let's just go back to the way it was. No further concessions. Let's just forget this happened. And the British were close to accepting when, at that time, the Zionist movement was based out of Berlin. And Zionists from the Berlin went to and met with the British War Cabinet, according to Benjamin Friedman. And they said, look, don't settle with Germany. We can bring America into the war. Just don't settle with Germany. All we want, only if we're successful in bringing America in and defeating Germany, we want your promise of support for a Jewish Commonwealth in Palestine. And the Zionist project had been around since the 1890s. So it was familiar with everybody by then. And so when the Balfour Declaration was issued by Lord Balfour, I think Foreign Minister of the British, circa 1917 or so, it was because America had entered into the war. And that was the end of it for Germany. We were too strong, our industrial base, all of that. But Germany was defeated and very harsh reparations imposed upon them. Friedman was there at the Versailles Treaty talks in 1999. Benjamin Friedman, the same man who spoke in 1961 in D.C. about these events, he said he was part of that Jewish delegation, or one of them. He says, up to that point, there was no anti-Semitism to speak of in Germany. Maybe some a little bit lingering from the days of Martin Luther in the 1500s when he wrote a book titled The Jews and Their Lies, which, it's hard to say that title these days without being labeled anti-Semite or something. But Martin Luther saw that, just by the scripture of Deuteronomy, they're compelled to support one another always in all things. They're going to get a tap on the shoulder from Mossad or the people that basically enforce obedience within the hierarchy. And at the highest levels, they have, they expect to have greater Israel before long now. So Friedman says, all right, 1919 in Paris, he's there with the Jewish delegation. He's part of it. They bring out this piece of paper called the Balfour Declaration, addressed to Lord Rothschild from the British Foreign Minister, promising support for a Jewish Commonwealth in Palestine. They say, hey, we get Palestine, right? Friedman says it's at that moment that the German delegation realized that was the deal. The Germans did everything they could to avoid justifying the U.S. entering World War I. They even gave notice they were going to be probably sinking the Lusitania because it was known to carry munitions. Germany published notices in U.S. newspapers warning people, don't travel on the Lusitania. It's carrying munitions to our opponents, and under the rules of war, we can sink it. And so it was at that moment, Friedman says, that word went back to Germany, and that's when he says there was no violence. It was all very, very orderly in a very German way. They simply began to shun Jewish businesses, began to, realize they did not want to have, like we had Michael Chertoff, a dual national, as the head of the criminal division of DOJ on 9/11, they didn't want to any longer have dual nationals, such as it were, running the German government. So they wanted Germans running the German government. They wanted Germany to be for Germany. And they also resented that, I think, a lot of, well, Jewish money. I mean, it's a real thing. How much did the Edelsons give Donald Trump? $100 million for his campaign. So that money is a real thing. They acquired properties. Germany was saddled with harsh reparations. And yet, wait, it works to Zionist interests. Zionists actually supported Adolf Hitler's rise to power because the most extreme people in Zionism or Talmudism, Judaism, they were A-OK with Hitler ordering Jews out of Germany. In fact, Hitler set up something called the Havana Agreement to allow German Jews to leave with their money, with their assets essentially intact. It would be put in escrow. They'd have to, when they got to Palestine to settle the land specified in the Balfour Declaration, they would have to use their funds to import machinery, other things from Germany. So, to help get the economy of the to-be new Israel kickstarted, Hitler was A-OK with that. Zionists supported his rise to power. There's another important book that I will share with you. Maybe the most important book I have ever read, apart from scripture, The Controversy of Zion by Douglas Reed. He explains that the most extreme factions in Talmudism, Judaism, they were absolutely okay with the persecution by Hitler of Jews who refused to, in Europe, who refused to return and repopulate the promised land. It's shocking to think that, and I don't deny, the slaughter of, in fact, I would point to the many extraordinary books written by David Irving, starting with Hitler's War, going on from there. He has acknowledged in recent years that although, what happened at Auschwitz is perhaps overstated, mischaracterized as to that having actually been a labor camp. There were certainly deaths there by disease. Otherwise, maybe some elderly were put to death. But there were, as far as the execution of Jews, it absolutely happened in mass in Poland at several other camps that David Irving, historian, identifies as run under Operation Reinhardt, is the name of it. Belsing, Sobibor. Now, he says the Germans were, they went so far as to, after those assassinations camps did what they did, extermination camps, they were demolished, and all evidence that were ever existing was removed. So that's where, but as far as the Holocaust goes, two of the great Holocausts of World War II were the German firebombing of Dresden and our firebombing of Tokyo. Hundreds of thousands of people killed, those nights, by fire. The term Holocaust means sacrifice by fire. So who was behind the politics of the firebombing? The Morgenthau plan for Germany, Morgenthau, that name, Benjamin Friedman worked with Morgenthau. Jewish, maybe tapped on the shoulders as a synonym of the greater Jewish population. The Morgenthau plan, as it was written for Germany after World War II, was to vastly depopulate Germany, to enslave parts of the German population, to totally deindustrialize Germany. To this day, I mean, it did not entirely happen, and what industry Europe has is German. And if the powers that be had simply allowed Germany to enjoy the benefits of affordable natural gas from Russia, instead of, bombing the Nord Stream pipelines so that Germany has to buy our American, what do they call it, liquefied natural gas, where we freeze the natural gas and ship it over there. But much more expensive. It helps our economy. But I think world peace, how does it ever happen? It comes when we all realize we've all been programmed through our religious narratives. And the Jews Judaism, Talmudism doesn't get a special pass to kill everybody else, just because, their scripture, Deuteronomy, would separate them from the rest of the world as, the Gentiles. No, we all need to sort of go back to what Kennedy foresaw, which was a true peace among the nations.
Absolutely, yeah, Carl. Wow, that's quite a rundown, quite a history. And, getting back to Senator Johnson.
Let me interrupt one more book. Can't forget. Very
Okay.
important, very brief book, Christopher Bolin's The War on Terror. It explains how the War on Terror was kickstarted by 9/11 primarily to benefit the Greater Israel Project. Yes, I actually I inscribed a copy of this to Senator Johnson, which I would still like to give to him. I've asked by email to have an appointment with him. He told me, all right, there was a DC conference on September 10th at which he spoke, and I paid $1,000 to be among the VIPs, having literally front row seat, because I very much intended to talk with him after he left the stage about why a few days earlier he tried to flush me down the memory hole on James Corbett, and it turns out Brett Weinstein by saying, oh, his office had no record of this guy, even though his committee interviewed me 6 weeks earlier. Senator Johnson, I'm over that. I understand you might be terrified. Hey, the chances of graduating this life are 100%. We're all going to graduate into eternity. And it's a question of what we do while we're here. Yeah, challenge. So I spoke with Senator Johnson after he tried to avoid me leaving the stage. We recognized each other. He's a very intellectually, mentally alert man. I was wearing essentially what I'm wearing now. It's almost my uniform. I wear it when I go down to Congress, wearing my USS Liberty ball cap. I find it's a great conversation starter. Not just about Liberty, but about 9/11. Because they ask me, they say, "Oh, thank you for your service." I say, "I'm sorry. I was only 10 years old the day the Liberty was attacked by Israel in the false flag event. But I've been honored to join the survivors at their reunions." And just like the Liberty attack, 9/11 was false flag terrorism in furtherance of the Greater Israel Project. But the pathway to get to the truth about 9/11 involves addressing the reality of what happened to the USS Liberty. And I intend to follow up, of course, with Senator Johnson that evening told me, well, his staff, they queried my social media and they have to protect him from people who maybe are discredited by, he didn't say, I mean, I posted things that are critical of Zionism, Israel, even of the somewhat vicious aspects of Deuteronomy as it's embedded in Judaism and Talmudism that say when you go into the land I'm giving you, kill everything, leave nothing alive with breath in it. That's sort of an archaic system that, the hardcore ones who are still adherents to it through entities like Mossad, they tap on the shoulder everyday Jews who I've had Jewish friends my whole life. They're among my most cherished friends, most intellectually interesting to talk with about almost anything, even in my condo building, which I would describe as a Vatican II compliant Judeo-Catholic population for the most part. I don't quite fit. They don't really want me on the board of directors because I want transparency about everything. This is an issue that I think everyone should be it's forgotten. 65, soon after Kennedy's death, the Pope decreed Vatican II, a key part of which was henceforth every good Jew, or every good Catholic should view every Jew as brothers. In fact, there's a book about this titled From Enemies to Brothers, I believe, is the title of the book by a man named O'Connell. And he delves into this over time. It turns out almost all Roman Catholics, even in the priesthood, who were advocates for, this merging of Judeo and Catholicism. On November 22nd, 2022, the World Jewish Congress put out a press release that they'd opened offices at the Vatican. So that, to me, points towards Judeo-Catholicism as being a very unified force. And I think it would have had to be the case even on 9/11, because it's like we're all going along with what's best for Israel because, well, the papacy probably wants what's best for Israel. And see, all this ties back into those religious narratives embedded in us, because going all the way back, and this is discussed even by Douglas Reed in that book, The Controversy of Zion, 1204 AD. What is that, 1,000 years? Well, over 1,000 years ago, the Fourth Crusade of the papacy, against the explicit written orders of the Pope, sacked Constantinople, which was then the epicenter of Orthodox Christianity. Much of the Crusades, you very well be Roman Catholic, and I appreciate your faith. And we've all been embedded with narratives that we need to understand the nuances where sometimes there are issues. So the papacy has always had issues with any flavor of, quote, Christianity except Roman Catholicism. It's the Jesuits, the military of the Roman Church, essentially were brought into being almost 500 years ago to counter the Reformation. And throughout history, they've infiltrated, co-opted, led astray Reformed denominations. They've assassinated people when it's benefit to the papacy. I mean, the Jesuits run Georgetown University in D.C. They own it. It's the pipeline into leadership in business and in government. And they, well, whatever one's religious belief, they will take you and they will conform you to a perspective that will be of use to their objectives. I think the greater conflict even today between the U.S. and Russia is traceable to that rift, of course, between the Roman Church and the Orthodox Church, which today is epicentered out of Russia. And even the conflict over Ukraine. There's a book I don't have with me. Douglas Reed in The Controversy of Zion addresses these same points. But the head of Army intelligence after World War One, named John Beatty, Beaty, published a phenomenal book, very highly reviewed by people at the highest levels of the U.S. military, 1951, titled The Iron Curtain Over America. And his analysis, he was funded by a private foundation to travel even globally between the two wars and study geopolitics. And his assessment was that, well, there's some history here that's just hard to, it's important though. Much of modern Jewry, 90% probably, would call themselves Ashkenazi of Eastern European Jewish origin. Well, the Eastern European Jewry is primarily traceable to a group historically known as the Khazars. There was a Khazar empire of several million encompassing an area, part of Ukraine, I suppose a part of the Pale of the Settlement, during the years when Jews were required to stay in only certain parts of Russia, even before the Tsar was toppled by the Bolshevik Revolution, which was driven by the leadership of it was Talmudic Jews out of the Odessa and Kiev, out of Ukraine. So here we have John Beatty, colonel of military intelligence, actually the founder of what became eventually the President's Daily Brief, writing in 1951 saying that Eastern European Jewry had massive immigration from that group in the late 1800s, the early 1900s. By the 1920s, had gained control of the Democratic Party. Chapter 3 of his book, The Iron Curtain Over America, published in 1951, says the Khazars joined the Democratic Party. And of course, their progeny now, via AIPAC, via Jewish lobbying, they own both parties for the most part. It's very hard to think of ever bringing a third party into competition. So he said that the mandate of Talmudic Zionism was to undermine and destroy Western Christianity in Europe, especially, but as a necessary step towards working to the acceptance of Greater Israel and a New World Order run from Jerusalem by Talmudic Zionists, I suppose, which
Absolutely. There's so much you can get into, but it all goes back to what we were talking about. They'll have something in common, and it all goes right back to Israel and what's going on now in Gaza.
Well, and we're all tied to those religious narratives that we were brought up in. And
Yep.
if you're Jewish, you might be a completely secular Jew. You might want to have nothing to do with, the Jewish scriptures, the Talmud, any of that. But if you get tapped on the shoulder by Mossad, they know that you're even secular Jew they still identify with, they're still part of the community. I mean, short of declaring themselves Roman Catholic, but if they declare themselves Roman Catholic, the Pope now says, hey, the World Jewish Congress has offices in the Vatican now. It's really Judeo-Catholicism. We're all supposed to be on the same sheet of music. So do what you're told, to help Mossad, because, between Mossad and arguably the Jesuits, I don't think much happens without the Superior General of the Jesuits signing off on it in history.
No,
Maybe not.
I agree. I agree totally. And, we're getting about time. But what I'd like to convey to you when you see Senator Johnson again, we're here. We're eyewitnesses to cold-blooded, premeditated murder by the Zionist state of Israel.
In cooperation with those in the highest levels of our government who are under that same control, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're here, and we've been spit on and treated like trash for serving our country, and you will not do anything about it because you have a Jewish master. You take all your money from AIPAC, all of you do.
He could renounce that. In fact, every member of Congress could just step away from that. They
Well, of
could
course,
say, They could say they are no longer going to accept APAC money. APAC should be registered as a foreign agent. And well, if they register as a foreign agent, then they'll take their money. But
Right.
not
Well,
until then.
you could tell him from me that, what kind of human beings are you to allow cold-blooded murderers to go freer then or now? There's no limitations on murder, and we're eyewitnesses to it. There was no mistaken identity. It was pre-planned, cold-blooded murder by our government, along with Israel. We were the the lambs, the sacrificial lambs that you sent us out there to be slaughtered by Israel. And they got by with, but by the grace of God, we stayed afloat. And we're here right now, and you people don't have the guts to address us.
Well,
Shame on all of you.
scared. And Senator Johnson did say in this Brett Weinstein interview, in fact, both of them said they're not suicidal, because they speak about 9/11, not even going near Israel. So they both said that, or Senator Johnson said, maybe it's best if maybe we don't really want to know the truth. Well, bullshit on that. No, it's time to cut to the chase. And I would say his hearings really should be on the topic of false flag terrorism.
Well,
And
we're here. We're here. Get
yes,
us in front of Congress.
you are the prime example of false flag terrorism.
Yes, and we can prove it. We're living here. We're eyewitnesses to it.
Yes,
They
and,
won't.
and
They
you
won't.
should,
They said there have been 5 investigations. There's never been one. They're all liars. There never has been an investigation.
well,
It's a cover up.
what they want to do, they have feel good hearings where they'll attack the official story and they'll even allow a glimpse of light to shine on some other truth, but then it's over. And then we'll pass the 25th anniversary of 9/11. We pass, what anniversary are we coming up on for Liberty?
It'd be 59 years, June the 8th, this coming. And Carl, I think we're going to wrap it up here. It's been a great, great show. Thank you so much.
It's an honor to
You're
speak to you.
Well, thank you, sir. You're a mountain of wealth with intelligence and books. You read a lot.
Well, I've been blessed with my federal pension. I've bought a few thousand books. I might find one of the 100 that's really worth reading cover to cover a few times, like the books I showed you.
All
Thank
right,
you
well,
again.
thank you.
And we're going to get the Liberty survivors in front of a Senate hearing. It's got to happen.
Thank you, sir. God bless you. And stick around a minute, please.
Yes, sir.